Still got people coming in, so I'm just going to give it a couple more minutes. Thank you all for your patience. I know you're eager to hear these readings. I certainly am. Okay, it's officially 2 o'clock on my clock, so we're gonna get started. Hello to everyone who's here. My name is Tan Light. I would like to welcome you to All It Up's Indie Reading Room. This is the final event for the Indie Reading Room series for May 2020. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a wonderful month, full of great readings, and I'm so pleased to be the host today as we gather once again to celebrate new Canadian literature. I can see that we've got a pretty good turnout of people, and we're seeing folks in from across the country and from beyond our borders, which is excellent. If any of you are new to Zoom, you will find there is a chat and a Q&A function. If you give your mouse a little wiggle, you should see those icons come up at the bottom. We're going to ask you to put comments into the chat, but use the Q&A feature for questions for the authors. Both of our authors are waiting in the wings right now, so I encourage you to say hello in the chat box. If you like, you can tell us where you're tuning in from. And you can say hi. If you have a question for either of the authors who are going to read for us today, then you can click on the Q&A at the bottom, and that will pop out a feature for you. You can put your question into it, and it will queue up all the questions together, and I'll be able to read those out to our authors later. We ask that you put the questions into the Q&A instead of the chat box, just so that we keep everything in one place. Okay, and if for any reason anyone can't hear me right now, if you could put a note into the chat box so that we can help you sort out your audio. Okay, then I think we're ready to get started. Before I introduce my first guest, we at All It Up would like to acknowledge the land on which we live and work. For thousands of years, it's been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Miigwech. We are also wishing to acknowledge the ongoing support of the Canadian government through the Canada Book Fund, the Canada Council for the Arts, and the Ontario Arts Council. And of course, we'd like to thank you for being here today as we celebrate indie publishing, indie authors, and indie books. So here's to you. I'm excited to have you with us to celebrate our 2 featured authors, Addie Tsai, who will be reading from her debut novel, Dear Twin, which was published by Metonymy Press, and Taslim Burkowicz, reading from her sophomore novel, The Desirable Sister, published by Roseway Publishing. Following each of our readings, we're going to have a short Q&A with the featured authors where you'll have the chance to ask them questions, both about their books and about their writing in general. We would ask that you put your questions in the Q&A, as I said, and we'll read them out to the authors. If you submitted questions in advance through email, please know that we've got them queued up to ask. So first up tonight, or today, I welcome Addie Tsai, who is an instructor of multiple arts disciplines at the Houston Community College, and who currently serves as the nonfiction editor at The Grief Diaries and associate editor in poetry at The Flexible Persona. Addie's creative work has earned her an MFA from Warren Wilson College and a PhD in dance from Texas Women's University, and has now appeared in a number of literary publications. Tonight, Addie will be reading from her debut novel, Dear Twin. Dear Twin explores what happens when a person you love most in the world, the person that you see as your touchstone, disappears and leaves you alone to pick up the pieces of your broken home. The Lambda Literary Review declared that Dear Twin is a necessary read for those who are negotiating diverse and complicated identities, or those who wish to understand them. We are so pleased to have Addie here today to read from her thought-provoking debut novel, Dear Twin. Welcome, Addie. I'd like to ask that you just take a moment to introduce your novel to the audience and then set up the reading that you're going to do for us today.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So, Dear Twin, which looks like this, is half epistolary, which means half of it is written in the form of letters, and then it's half traditional narrative. The main character, her name is Poppy, and she's half Asian, half white, and her twin sister Lola has just gone missing, and they're not sure where she is. But this reading I'm going to give just sort of really shows from Poppy's perspective her experience of being an identical twin. Okay, thank you. As if identical wasn't bad enough. With mirror twins, the egg splits later than usual. If it had split any later, we could have ended up conjoined, like Chang and Ung, forever attached. When the egg splits, it already has a left side and a right. Two embryos swim alongside their mirror image. I'm left-handed and Lola's right. We have the same little dot above our lip, except mine's on the left, hers on the right. In some cases, mirror twins' hair might whirl in opposite directions, or their first teeth might pop up on opposite sides of their mouths. Even their fingerprints could be mirror images of one another. In the scariest cases, one mirror twin is born with her organs where they're supposed to be, while her twin's organs grow on the opposite side of her body. But something happened when the doctor pulled Lola out, which cast my story in turn. Lola's hip popped as she was being born. From that rift, our story spun. Her hip popped, which somehow came to mean that she was more vulnerable than I was, and that I must have kicked my way out, so that I could be first, so that I could get away from her and our tiny container of two. My 4 extra ounces at birth meant I was destined to be the thicker, curvier one. Lola's hip popping, which led to an x-ray to ensure the situation wasn't serious, spun her story too, that she was broken from birth. If she was broken, I was whole. If she could break, then by the very definition of mirror twinning, nothing could ever be wrong with me. Lola would become defined by the breaking of her body, a breaking that would result in feeling wanted, feeling seen. The fact that my bone did not sing of brokenness meant I would never want or need for anything. With that one little pop signaling her arrival in the world, the soundlessness of my own bones in that same room meant I would be marked as the invisible one. I suppose we both couldn't have been the seen ones. We were twins. There always has to be an odd one out. The question of the safety of her body made her remarkable, for better or for worse. When twins are born, each and every detail of our twinned bodies is held up to the light like a piece of someone else's mail you want to dissect secretly. Just the act of flashing a light through that envelope reframes its mysterious contents. The need to witness whatever is inside becomes an act of suspicion. Twins are born, and without much question or choice, they become part of this thing much larger and snakier than themselves. They become things. But here's the thing, they don't even know it's happening. But here's the thing, they don't know why it matters. And when they realize it does, it's often too late. But this is the truth. We love each other. Our primary role in the family is to be those precious twins everyone coos and gasps at like babies or old-time circus freaks. Besides, twins are always creepy, right? Didn't you see The Shining? Baba dressed us alike so he could be a hit with his Asian immigrant friends, and our white mother dressed us alike so she could attract more of her favorite foreign barflies and clovers she loved to bring home, like turning her daughters into 2 gold fireflies held in a mason jar with a promise to release them into the starry night just as soon as she's caught the attention of her prince. But then she is so swept up with her prince, she forgets the fireflies are still trapped in the mason jar on a coffee table in the other room gathering dust. And the fireflies stay quiet, hoping the longer they do, the sooner the fireflies can become daughters again. And then the mother never really does remember the jar, the fireflies, the starry black night that is their home, or even her daughter's. So in the jar they remain until the prince breaks their mother's heart and leaves her, which he always does, and she meets them again. But while they're waiting to become human, to distract themselves from their mother's occasional and recurring disappearance, or their father's unthinking rage, the twin girls giggle underneath their thrift store quilt on their double mattress in their mother's small apartment as they perform twin impressions of their father's Mandarin for fun, or at least try to, incomprehensible as their father's language is to both of them. They record themselves on their mother's old boombox singing and acting out The Little Mermaid, their favorite, and then play back the recording while pointing at each other and giggling, their two faces turning as red as the pair of suckers their mother brings home from the bank. They hold each other in the bed they share while they wait for their mother to come home from the club, desperately hoping their mother will come upon them, soft and sentimental in her tipsy haze, and clutch her hand to her heart at the sight of her twin girls and their doubled love. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading from Dear Twin for us, Addie. That was a really great introduction to Poppy and Lola and the dynamic at the heart of this novel. I personally can't wait to read more about them and to dive further into this novel. So at this point in the event, we're going to open up the first Q&A. So again, I'll ask you to pop your questions into the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. And we've got a few that we've already lined up, so I'm going to start with those. I read on your website that you share a few things in common with Poppy and Lola, including the fact that you are a mirror twin. Did you set out to write autofiction? Do you consider Dear Twin autofiction?
Yes, I do actually. I actually love the term autofiction. It's not one we use as much in the States, but I really love a lot of the French novels that have come out of autofiction, like Marguerite Duras is a big favorite of mine. But the story, I would say, actually started when I wrote a memoir a number of years ago, and it was supposed to get published, and then the contract fell through, and it really gave me time to kind of reflect on who I wanted to read the story, and also how I wanted to protect the sort of pretty intense personal narratives that this story is coming from in my life. So, so yes, it's definitely autobiographical fiction, but it's certainly fiction. You know, Poppy and Lola are definitely created out of what my sister and I experienced, but are definitely like their own like individual people. And the actual missing narrative is something I created in order to have the epistolary format work, which is something I really wanted to do in the book. And so that sort of afforded me a way for Poppy to sort of tell her story in a way that made sense, but also particularly trying to tell it to Lola specifically.
Right. And can you talk a bit more about navigating writing such a personal narrative that involves people who are close to you in your real life? Like, did your sister read your work early on or later?
Well, my relationship with my sister is pretty complicated, so I don't really share my work with her, but she knows of its existence. She did come to one of the early readings of Dear Twin, the launch actually, and she read it, but I have no idea. No one in my family. I know that my stepmother came and my sister came, but no one has actually said it. No one in my family has actually literally said anything to me about the book. So I have no idea sort of what they think about it, which is actually kind of fine for me. I'm sure, I mean, it's really complicated material, and I feel like sometimes the best thing is to just be able to have our own relationship with it. But I think writing memoir and writing anything that's autobiographical is super tricky if you're close to your family. And there's also, I really can see both sides of the argument around the rights to write about these, really private, personal details and the right to write about them. And I really don't think that, at least in America, I don't think that we've really sort of updated how complex it really is. I think all of the laws we have around it are really old. But for me personally, I just felt that the fiction, I do think, sort of creates a protective barrier. But even if you're to write nonfiction, I just think that you really have to be putting yourself more on the table than other people, and that you really have to be thinking about what is your motivation to write about these stories, and are you writing about them in an honest way, and are you really thinking about all the complexities when you write about them?
Right. What did you learn about writing a fictional version of yourself?
I would say actually the hardest thing to do was, since it is young adult, was, I am sort of going back in time and trying to think about what I was like psychologically at that time. But there were definitely parts, and I had a lot of feedback on this where, she was too knowing about her situation. And I had to really sort of think about what would a young woman, a young person, really, like, how complicated would her feelings really be about it. And so it's a kind of awkward thing. In a memoir, I wouldn't have had to do that. I would have had to just sort of reflect on it through time. But to talk through the voice of a teenager, I really had to think about, like, no, she's not actually going to get all of these. Even though I got a lot of the dynamics when I was younger, she can't be too above the material, right? And so that was probably the trickiest part. But I also learned, I don't know how to describe it, but I learned a lot about these two young women too, like how hard that situation was for them and how confusing. And so, it's weird. You think you've done like all the work you need to do on something that you've experienced, but I think you can always do more,
Yeah. Wow, that must have been a really intense period of self-reflection in addition to an intense period of creativity.
Yeah, definitely. And I really want, I wrote, the reason that Lola is sort of present as a kind of haunting figure, but she doesn't exist, is that I just had read so many books about twins that were just like carbon copies, had no really individual personality. And so I really wanted to write a book about twins that was really about one person. But in doing that, I did really want to make sure that I was never telling Lola's story, but that Poppy was only able to refer to things that she would have had either been told or direct witness. And I didn't really want there to be any explicit details about what happens to her. So, so I was thinking a lot about, this isn't my story and this isn't Poppy's story, and how do I sort of navigate that while still dealing with the sort of narrative content of it, if that makes sense.
We'd like to know what challenges you faced as a writer with your choice to use the epistolary form, and I would love to know more about that choice as well, and how that kind of feeds into our getting to understand everything from Lola's perspective.
So the reason that I wanted to do the epistolary form is that I just love it. Like, I've loved it for my whole sort of reading life. The color purple was hugely informative to me, as this Frankenstein continues to be really important to me. But also, I think because I grew up as a twin, I'm always looking for that other person to write to. I often, if I'm not writing in epistolary form, I'm often writing in the second person. There's always like this one other person that I sort of need to be talking to, whether it's myself or somebody directly. But I'd say that the biggest challenge is really keeping the momentum going. And so that's why I didn't want to write like a full epistolary novel. I really felt that the narrative can kind of break that up. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting form because it really was developed when the mail system became developed, and so postal service became really activated, and so then there was like, you could actually send letters, and it was very exciting. They could get to people very quickly, but now, because technology around communication is changing so fast, it's never gone out of fashion. And I think there's something for the young adult that it's particularly exciting, because now we have we have novels with emails, and we have novels with text messages, and there's just so many ways to use the epistolary form, I think, for teenagers. But I think the challenge of it, obviously my epistolary novel is even harder because she never writes back. So Poppy has to keep this has to continue to make sense for her to do this. And so the sort of framework that I came up with was that Poppy was going to get the chance to tell her story uncontrolled, uninterrupted, how she saw what happened with the two of them within their family trauma dynamics. And I think that that's like the real power of the epistolary form, is that you just get to really get inside what this one character feels about the relationship between them and whoever it is that they're communicating with.
Very interesting. Raindrop would like to know how your dance has influenced your writing.
Yeah, this is a question I get asked often. I never know how to answer it. My relationship to dance is a very, non-traditional one. Even though I got a PhD in dance, what I focused on was actually pop culture, dance and pop culture. And I don't really have the traditional dance background, but I do I think a lot about movement. I think about bodies when I'm writing. If language isn't doing if the language isn't moving in interesting and exciting ways, even if the story is good, I'm completely uninterested. And so what I wanted to do in Dear Twin was to really bring out that lyricism. And so I think that there's a way that writing can really evoke movement and really evoke bodies that they have much more in common than I think people think that they do. And I think of dance as just any other text. I think of dance as film, as writing, that it's just another way to experience the same things that we're looking for in books also.
Right, it's like the scripting of body language almost.
And I did, I have a lot of clothing, a lot of outfits, a lot of, gestures and facial expressions. So I think and I also think it's important to really bring the body into writing more, because we also aren't really thinking about all the different different abilities of bodies, different neurodiversity. There's just a million types of bodies and experiences that are coming to fiction. And I think that we should be thinking about all the different ways that people are processing story,
Right. Did you have to do a lot of research into writing Dear Twin to complement the more personal narrative?
That's a good question. I would not so much research, but I did read a lot of YA books at that time to really make sure to get a sense of, how I was writing through the teen voice, but also what were the sort of formal patterns and, the ways that, what kind of novels were out there that teens were getting really excited by. I was definitely writing this book as a cross genre. I never meant to write it solely in YA. I wanted it to be YA, but with this sort of literary fiction ambition, I guess, because I really feel that young adults are so much more sophisticated of readers than we often give them credit for, because they're consuming so many different types of textual spaces that we weren't when we were younger. We had books and articles, and they have videos and blogs. The things that they're getting on the internet, and they're processing very quickly. And I just felt that the genre was ready to be pushed into a more complicated realm. And so I wrote this sort of thinking both about adults who might be thinking about their younger life, and also young adults who are sort of also have a high degree of reflection. So I read a lot of different kinds of YA to sort of get a sense of kind of the overall genre. So I think that was the most research. But in terms of the familial part, that's a good question. There are definitely times where I had to just really go back, in my mind to those times, and really sort of activate that part of my brain to remember what had happened, and then there's like this whole mental work that you're doing. Okay, so that's what happened. Now, how do I sort of shift it for it to make sense for the novel? So it was like,
Right.
it was like a little bit mentally exhausting, but for good purpose, you know?
So mental acrobatics, definitely.
Definitely, yeah.
How long do you think the entire process took you to write Dear Twin? You said it started out more as a sort of a memoir, and then morphed into a more of a fiction project. So what does that look like in kind of the total investment of time?
Yeah, I tend to write really fast and then edit slowly. So I think I wrote the memoir, maybe over a summer, and then I think I wrote Dear Twin, like the first draft, over maybe a month actually. And but I think getting from like the beginning of writing Dear Twin specifically to publication was probably, I think it's like 5 years or so, 5-6
Okay.
years, maybe, yeah.
That's a lot of work back and forth. What was the most surprising thing about the process of publishing a novel versus some of the like literary magazine publishing that you've done?
There's just like there's just like an exciting energy around anytime you have a book, and this is my first book, and this was also my third contract, so like I had become like pretty disillusioned, and you just hear so much about editors and mostly you hear complaints, right? Because nobody's really going to talk about things unless they're over the moon or they're grumbling about it. And
Right.
and Metonymy was just like incredible to work with from through the whole process. And they really did, with the edits, it was really a collaborative conversation, and there were a lot of things. Well, first of all, they figured out, like, my timelines were all messed up because I was like half in the novel timeline and like half in my real life, and so they were very astute about picking up those things. But also they just really got the dynamics that I was working with, and so there were some things that they suggested I write into that really, I think, just really made the world of Dear Twin just really so much more complex and right for the novel, that I really needed that extra perspective, which is it's just a different perspective than even like an insightful reader. It's like, because they're also thinking about how the work is being consumed, and they're having to think about so many different levels. So so yeah, I did not actually expect that the conversation around the like sort of major edits would have been so exciting and fruitful, and also taught me a lot about the book too,
Nice. And if you want to hold up the cover again, that cover is gorgeous. Did you have a lot of input into it? Because it seems very specific to your character. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the process of coming to that cover.
So I knew that I wanted a queer Asian artist to illustrate the cover, and that, I always knew that whenever the book was going to happen, that the cover was going to be something that was going to make or break, like a deal for me. So, but basically I went on Google and I looked for queer Asian illustrators. I knew that I also wanted an illustration rather than like photo or something like that. And so I found Kika Nitsa, who's a queer Filipinx artist in Toronto, who I actually only just met, but we've been working together
for
a while. And I mean, I had talked to a couple of people before her, but I just really loved her style. And I didn't actually do anything. I just sent her the manuscript, and then she sent me, maybe 5 choices, and we actually both loved this one the best. And the reason I like this one the best is because of the side eye. I don't know if yeah.
It's such a good detail. As soon as I saw the cover, I was like, oh man, this is going to be interesting.
Also did the Poppy and Juniper, who is Poppy's girlfriend, who I haven't mentioned yet. But I love her so much that now I just like try to get her to just illustrate little things for Dear Twin. So she did the Dear Twin tour graphic, and she's just done a number of things for me. And she's really, she's been really wonderful work with. But yeah, and I think also, you know, because she's also Asian, she gets, you know, some of the like facial details that I really wanted. And but yeah, I just kind of let her go. I was just like, you know, just here's the book, just do what, you know, do what you what seems right to you. And luckily we just had we were just very compatible in terms of what I wanted and what she was able to give. Yeah.
That's excellent. It's an excellent result. I think it really kind of draws your eye. That side eye, it draws your eye in immediately, and you want to know what's going on there. I'm just going to at this time ask if anyone has any last questions they would like to put into the Q&A before we move on. Get those desperate questions out there. Did you want to leave us with any last reading recommendations? You've already given us some pretty good ones. Anybody you want to give a shout out to?
Oh, in terms of like what I would recommend people read, or?
Yeah.
Well, I will say that one of the books that I read a lot when I was writing Dear Twin, which is a young adult author, and her name's Nina LaCour, and the book is called We Are Okay, and it's like one of my favorite books of all time. And I like it also because it's a very it is a very quiet queer YA book, and I think it's really wonderful. But and I'll put it in the chat in case anyone. Yeah.
And Jason has the final question of the night. He would like to know if your book has been optioned by Hollywood yet.
Not yet. Still waiting. Very exciting.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for those thoughtful questions. Thank you to Addie for reading. If today's reading has whet your appetite, we encourage you to pick up a copy of Dear Twin. You can get that from us at allitup.ca, where we're currently offering the audience of today's reading a 20% discount until June 5th with the promo code Reading Room. That's all one word and all capital letters. You just enter that at the code at checkout and it will apply the discount. We also have free shipping currently on All It Up in Canada, so we will ship to you anywhere in Canada for free. If you'd like to buy that from your local bookseller, you can also find a copy. We're going to put a link to a map of local booksellers in Canada who are currently open for delivery or pickup. So you will find that link in the chat box as well. If you don't capture the link now, have no fear. It is in the PDF program that we supplied to you prior to the event. So thank you once again to Addie for reading. Thank you to Metonymy Press for being with us here in the reading room today. It's my pleasure to introduce our second author, Taslim Burkowicz, who will be reading from her second novel, The Desirable Sister, from Roseway Publishing. Taslim is a BC-based author with a bachelor's degree in political science and education from Simon Fraser University. Her first novel was Chocolate Cherry Chai, and it made the CBC's 2017 Fall Books Preview. Since its release in late 2019, The Desirable Sister has also garnered plenty of media attention. The Desirable Sister is a story about immigrant sisters trying to navigate race and the bitter games that women are forced to play in order to achieve the ranks of beauty and success. Each one suffers for what she wants, yet ultimately this novel shows us the strength of love between sisters. Her rich descriptions take us around the globe, from the party scene in Goa to a safari in Africa, all the while the story is anchored in suburban Vancouver. Please welcome Taslim. Taslim, if you want to take a second and tell us a little bit more about your novel, The Desirable Sister, and set up the scene that you're going to read for us today.
Okay. The Desirable Sister is about colorism, and that's the idea that women are hierarchically graded upon the skin color that they have. So I really wanted to showcase both the way our Western culture looks at skin color as well as the Indian culture. So I have two characters in the novel, and like Addie's novel, I examine sisters. One is born very light-skinned and passes as white, and the second is born darker, and immediately, as soon as anyone sees her, she is framed as being Indian. So I wrote the novel with the two sisters going through life at the same time, but being received differently by society, and also examining how they themselves view each other and their own personal self. So the scene I'm about to read for you is from the father's perspective. So the novel has split up mostly between two of the girls. So I alternate narratives between both of their ideas, but every once in a while I have another character narrate. And in the scene I'm about to read to you, it's the father. Should I go ahead and read the scene? All right. Mangoes for Serena. Qasim found the condominium too white, too sterile. He told his daughter she could pick any furniture she liked from his store, but Serena picked the most basic set they sold, a white bonded leather sofa and chair with a glass coffee table to go along with it. Her choice frustrated him. The furniture set could have easily come from IKEA, but still, he had said nothing. He had so many nicer pieces, sectionals with metal trim and genuine leather upholstery, but who was he to tell his adult daughter how to decorate her first home? Now, looking at the traffic from the 17th floor, he felt trapped, as if he was a butterfly pinned in a glass case. The floor-to-ceiling glass windows make me feel like I'm living in a jewelry box, Serena said easily, tinkering with a vase on the table. It kind of reminds me of Gulshan Auntie's bedroom in Kenya. Everything was so gorgeous there. How can living in a box of any kind be a good thing? Qasim replied. Seeing Zenith give him a warning look, he cleared his throat. It's just that you have such a nice room at our house. Why do you need to move? Oh, Dad, I have a career as a social worker now. I make my own money. I can't live with you guys forever. Not saying forever, dear. What's the hurry in leaving? I moved a few blocks from home. You didn't make a fuss when Gia moved to Vancouver, and she doesn't even own a place. She's renting. I'm trying to invest in property over here. That's Gia, though, said Qasim, wincing at the two chairs and table. This signified a bigger problem to him. Serena didn't have enough chairs to host her whole family. You know, she's been traveling to India lately. She's an artist. I can't hold her back. But you can hold me back? Trust me, I'd do the same if I could manage to get Gia to listen to me for 1 second. Girls belong at home. Until they get married, at least. Qasim. Zenith shook her head. She emptied out reddish-green mangoes into a bowl on the counter. The mangoes were supposed to make Serena think of home. Qasim knew this was what Zenith was after. But which home? Zenith's Ugandan home, or the home Serena left her parents behind in? What happened to the cool dad who let his girls go camping and do fun things without escorts? She said. I didn't know that I'd give them free rein to leave home. I thought they'd be more inclined to stay home if they saw they had freedom. Like a dog that wanders a fenced-in backyard, Serena offered. Qasim. Serena shouldn't be smothered with traditional expectations the way we once were. Even I see that. But those expectations led me to you, he exclaimed. Actually, they led you to Gulshan, Zenith teased. Stuck in a family of 3 women, why didn't he learn he'd always be outnumbered? He exhaled, feeling jittery. Serena didn't know it was polite to offer her parents a cup of chai while they fumbled around, helping her put the finishing touches on her new place. Serena was still in the role of a daughter, clueless on how to entertain guests in her own home. And that was exactly what Qasim and Zenith had become in their daughter's home, guests. Qasim walked around in the kitchen, poking around the cupboards, wondering if he shouldn't boil himself a kettle of water and throw a tea bag into one of Serena's new unstained mugs. His sock toes made imprints in the new white carpet. He saw Zenith motion wildly to him when Serena's back was turned. Hurry, let's go, let's give her space. Qasim nodded and followed his wife to the front door. Dad, said Serena just as he was slipping on a boot, do you want a drink before you leave? Tea? I raided your cupboards before I moved out. Mom said you never drink the instant coffee, so that's all I have. Do you want a cup? It makes perfect sense for me to drive half a mile and drink something I should have thrown out. Qasim, Zenith chided. I'm joking, of course. I'll have cream in mine. When he saw Serena's face, he smiled. Never mind, black is fine. When her parents left, Serena looked around her new apartment. She felt invigorated, alive. Finally, she could live the way she wanted without judgment or interference. She went into her bedroom closet and pulled out a dress, short and strapless. The whiteness of her dress reminded her of her new place, Oddly, the outfit looked exactly like something Gia would wear. She slipped it on. It showed off Serena's shapely body, not giving her any place to hide. With the lily white dress pressed next to her hazelnut skin, Serena had to admit she'd never looked better. She was not lost in the color, as she was often told she was when she wore black or brown. The dress was not worth thousands of dollars like one of Gia's Dior or Chloe pieces. But Serena didn't think any normal person would be able to tell if the chiffon overlay was couture or not. A time not that long ago, she would have hated exposing her dark skin to the world. But today she was proud of it. She had worked hard at the gym and earned every tightly toned muscle. Men would surely appreciate the luster of her skin. And if Indian men didn't, white men surely would. Her old friends from the University Indian Association had invited her to dine with them in a restaurant in downtown Vancouver. She knew the place well as she passed it every day on her way to work, where her job was to help drug-addicted and battered women get in touch with social services. The restaurant was filled with Gothic candles that dripped puddles of wax on the cement floor. It served red wine in water glasses. In trying not to be pretentious, it was exactly that. Serena usually avoided the spot with its overpriced microgreen salads and experimental house music. But tonight, Serena would go. Tonight, Serena planned on celebrating herself. So I hope I clarified it, but Gia is the light-skinned one and Serena is the darker one, which I guess was obvious when I read the book, but I should have prefaced it with that. I chose to read from Serena's spot because that was the part that I really wanted to highlight today.
That was a great reading, Taslim. Thank you so much. That scene really put me back into when I was out on my own in my first apartment, having my parents over as guests and trying to really figure out how I was going to navigate terms, on a life on my own terms at that point. So it's interesting that you selected that to introduce us to Serena. Before I open the floor to the audience again, we will take your questions for the Q&A. So please just pop those into the Q&A feature. But I do have a couple of questions in the queue to kick us off with. So I would love to talk a little bit more about who inspired the sibling pair at the heart of The Desirable Sister.
Okay, so what I wanted to show was how something as superficial as skin color can set two sisters on completely different paths in life and how the world would receive them. And actually, I used myself as inspiration. It's completely fictional, whereas in my first novel, I looked a lot at my own ancestry. So this book is, all the stories are fictional, but what I found in my own experience with colorism was that I've actually had the experience on being on both sides of the fence. In some circles, I'm considered light-skinned and I have access to this world. And in other circles, I'm considered dark and Indian, and I've been branded as that. And using both of those very different experiences, I created the sisters and gave them more contrasting differences. As a person, I always find it surprisingly how different I'm related to, depending on what circle I'm in and what I have to fight for to get my voice heard. So for Gia, she's very white, and she's a model, and she fights for her identity. She loses sense of who she is because when people see her, they don't see Indian, and she fights for that voice. Whereas Serena feels she can't discard this. She feels like she's forever the Indian diplomat. People look at her and she has to speak as the voice of India. And she's never even been to India. She also experiences a lot of direct racism. Whereas Gia hears about Indian people and she finds herself embarrassed that her parents might eat with their hands, or there's little things about her that almost reject the culture. And then later in life, she wants to claim it back. And Serena, on the other hand, doesn't even have that option because people are always looking at her as a certain way, and she gets called Packy, and she has a very different experience in high school and elementary school than Gia has.
Right. What did you learn from writing each of those perspectives? Like, did you learn? They're very complementary, but also very oppositional stances, but you've experienced both of them. So I'm wondering, in embodying both of those kind of experiences, did it teach you anything about yourself?
Yeah, it taught me that it's so easy for women to get caught up in this cycle when we are being graded hierarchically, even if we're at the top or at the bottom. It's easy to believe these fictions as being something real. And even the sisters, they turn against each other. Even when Gia tries to help Serena, Serena turns on her. And this relationship goes back and forth. And I also wanted to explore almost how it spirals in a bigger context of other characters. So how the father gets caught up in this, or how his wife does. And I also have other characters in the novel in India in Africa, I should say, that get caught up in the cycle as well. For example, Gulshan, Zenith's sister. Zenith is Gia and Serena's mother. Zenith is darker and her sister Gulshan is whiter. And you see, I wanted to show how we pass on these ideas. Like when I wrote the novel, I realized how much I tried to write down all of the things that had ever been said to me. Stay out of the sun, you're going to get darker, you better be careful. Or, all of these sayings that were ever said to me. And I wrote them all down, and I wanted to have the book highlight every one of those cases. And when I did this, I realized that writing the book, I realized that the goals we strive for are so unrealistic. Like, for example, in Bollywood, we have actresses that are so fair, and they are on these Fair and Lovely ads. And the thing that is the most shocking about this is they're actually part British. So you won't even ever be able to achieve that standard. And when I wrote that book, I realized how unrealistic the standards placed on women are. It just seemed like if you were darker, you'd have no chance at being beautiful, as is the way the world is spun. But I also wanted to show the flip side of being white isn't always desirable. And I do this in Gia's character. She faces some unique hardships on being desired. And I really wanted to show that other side as well when I wrote this. So I wanted to have both of those. And I learned about myself when I wrote those, because I saw how unrealistic some of these standards are.
Right. And so with your first book, it was very much more based on your personal experience. And with the Desirable Sister, it sounds very intentional where you were going with your narrative. What was the difference in your writing practice between books and how you approach the materials in trying to build your narratives for these two books?
My first novel, again, it was fictional, but like you said, I looked at my maternal ancestry to write it. It required a different type of research in that I had to look at actual dates in time in history, the history of India, the history of Africa, the history of immigration. And so I got lost in constructing from that framework. I had to stay very true to the details. In this novel, I was given a little bit more freedom into expressing a more modern look at drugs, at sex, the way that women live now. So I felt a little bit more free with that. But I also had to do a different type of research because I wanted to make it believable that Gia was a model in her time period. So I had to look at the fashions, I had to look at the designers. They both were research, but in fully different. The types of books I had were completely different. One fashion books, the other one like books on the history of Africa and colonization. So
right, very different.
Very different, yeah, for sure.
How long did it take you to write The Desirable Sister from start to finish?
2 years.
And what did the process look like for you?
I felt like most of it wrote itself. I felt like I had so many experiences with racism and colorism that I wanted to include, and I built the plot around those targeted issues. Like I mentioned to you about certain things that I've heard being said. I wanted even Gia to embody those racist ideas without realizing she was saying them to Serena. So when she says to her, they're in an airport in Dubai and they're looking at lipstick, and she tells Serena that that color will look good on her skin because, she's darker, and that Gia could never wear such a color. It's such a casual remark, but it hurt her sister so much. So I wanted to take all those micro aggressive comments and then also include bigger issues of racism when Serena's just getting on a bus and someone bumps into a white woman or gets in her way and she says, "Go home, Paki." I wanted to have all of those experiences and then have the plot kind of go around that.
Right. There's quite a bit of travel incorporated into this narrative, with a number of international locations. Do you like to travel? But also, in a more loaded maybe question, do you find the experience of your person changes significantly when you travel?
Yes, I love to travel. I lived in Tokyo for 4 years, and I traveled Asia and Africa and India. So I've been around the world quite a bit. But the reason I included travel in this novel specifically was because I wanted to show how we look at colorism, not how it affects all parts of the world. So when I went to Tokyo, I realized there was a lot of skin whitening creams and things that you could find, or in the Philippines, there was this or there was that. And I guess what I wanted to embody in the novel is when they go to East Africa and they stay with their family, it's like this bubble and all those same ideas about, and it's not just the Western world. Like we could look at this and we could blame the Western world, oh, this, that, but the Indians themselves, they take on these concepts. Because when I did research for the book, like remember when you asked me, how did it change me? I learned about how in the Mughal Empire, women were, the women in the harem were quite white, and that was their ideal beauty. And this was before British colonialism. So we do perpetuate these ideas within our own culture as well. And when they go, they're in their own bubble, in their own Indian culture and community. And you see that the ideas are the same as they are in the Canadian culture. So we keep thinking of ourselves as emancipated and we're so Western and we're so ahead. But once you enter these little bubbles within the community, it's like you're stuck in the same, marriage proposal, like looking for a light-skinned woman. Like you see the same things, and we don't grow past that. And even if we grow past that bubble, we go into the Western, well, the Western people are saying the same thing too. So
Right.
that's kind of what I was trying to show by showing all the travel is every country has almost their own issue with colorism, and they're same and different. They're same but different. Maybe I should call it same but different.
Right. It's similar feelings, but it's expressing itself uniquely with each individual makeup of the country and its visitors. Yes. And with immigration now, we're seeing new populations move significantly around the globe, but with each kind of landing, it takes a while to assimilate and for those cultures to get to know one another and form trust and form community. And so I find that interesting that, the experience is a global one and one that we must all work.
And the ideals of beauty weren't so different. They weren't so different. Like if you go, when you went to the Philippines and Tokyo and India and Africa, it's like the ideals of beauty are almost the same. You can find that fairness cream wrapped in different names in different ways, but it's the same, like almost identically the same product or selling you the same idea.
Right.
Whiteness is beauty. And what are we saying to people that aren't fitting into that model? That can never achieve that.
Right. Yes. And then of course you have all the white women who are trying to be as tanned as possible.
True. And that's the flip side of Gia when she says, you're so lucky, people know who you are. I have to fight to get my voice heard. I pass. And Serena doesn't understand that. She sees that as being a privilege. Whereas Gia has to keep going to India and keep trying to eat her culture so that people see it.
Right. It's almost like being denied your birthright almost.
Right.
Because people can't easily identify you. That would be a very frustrating experience to have personally. Yes. Okay. Let's talk about something just a little bit lighter. What are you reading these days? What would you like to recommend to us?
Oh, well, I'm reading I'm reading Jane Eyre right now. I'm like the last 20 pages. I'm looking around because my novel is always around. I'm in the last 20 pages. My reading style is very eclectic. I'm all over the map. It often has something to do with whatever my characters are at the moment. So the character I'm writing about right now, she's a raver living in the 90s, but she's obsessed with English lit books from the past. So.
Nice. That's I'm looking forward to reading that project as well. So we're drawing to a close for our event. If anyone has any last minute questions they would like to pop into the Q&A, we are ready to take them. It's been delightful to talk with you. If you want to talk a little bit more about that new writing project, I'd love to know how far
Sure.
along it is and when's it coming.
Well, in between that book, I actually finished another one. I just haven't launched it. It's about a woman, an Indian woman, because I like to stay within the field of Indo-Canadian fiction. She's 38 and she discovers her husband isn't who he says she is. So she has to reinvent her life. And I have a parallel plot line along that where I have a dancer in the Mughal Empire. So every chapter is interspliced, and I try to address wildfires in BC and a few other environmental issues. But the novel I'm working on right now that I was telling you about is I'm trying to write about the rave scene in the 90s. So it's completely, again, the main character will be Indo-Canadian as well.
Cool. That will be a unique
Wilder
take on that
and
scene.
yeah, it's hard to it's an interesting time period. So
cool. Well, thank you so much to Taslim and to everyone who asked questions for us today. Once again, I'd like to encourage everybody to grab a copy of The Desirable Sister from All Lit Up. And right now we're offering you a 20% discount with the code Reading Room. And if you hurry, you can take advantage of our free shipping offer. We'll pop the link into the chat box right now, or you can find it in the program that was a part of your email. We also will share the link with you to the booksellers map so that you can consult it to find a bookstore near you where you could pick up either of these fantastic novels. Thank you so much, Taslim and Roseway Publishing, for being part of the Reading Room. Thank you again to Addie for joining us as well. This brings us to the end of our programming for today, and we hope that you have enjoyed the very first Reading Room event series. We've certainly enjoyed hosting it this month. If you missed any of the events earlier in the month, we're going to be loading all of the Indie Reading Room recordings to our YouTube channel, and we will post the link for you in the chat right now. If you're not already following All Lit Up on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, we would encourage you to do so. Our handle for all of our platforms is All Lit Up Canada. That is 3 L's, no spaces, and it's all lowercase. Once again, thank you, Addie and Taslim. Thank you to our publishers, Metonymy and Roseway, who helped make this evening possible. And thank you to everyone who watched from home. We are so glad you came to spend time with us this afternoon. We hope that you enjoy reading these novels in the weeks to come, and we wish you all a very wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.